Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Walter's World, the podcast series from Astadia. My name is Walter Sweat, and I'm the Astadia CTO. For those of you who don't know, Astadia is a global service provider, a company that focuses on mainframe migration and modernization. Today, I'm delighted to have one of my friends, Steve Reed, who's the Principal Program Manager for Microsoft, join us. Steve is integral in working with cloud migrations for organizations, and I am delighted to have you here with us today, Steve.
Pleasure to be here, Walter.
It's always fun to get to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. Same here.
Thanks so much. Steve, can you describe for the audience what you and your team do at Microsoft?
Absolutely. My team is known as Azure Global Engineering, and it's a pretty large group within Microsoft. We actually are a part of Azure Engineering. The team that I am on is tasked with going after what I would call the strange and unusual workloads that typically do not run in a cloud platform. So, we collectively refer to those as legacy. Good example is IBM mainframe, ZOS, Unisys mainframe comes to mind. All the mid-ranges that are out there, be it Power Platform, AS400, legacy Unix. These are, non-traditional in that they're non-x86 based. And a lot of times what we find in our travels is that, there are folks that actually want to get out of the data center business. But they still have these pesky mainframes and these legacy systems. And a lot of the time, they don't even know that they can run those workloads in Azure. So what my team is tasked with is helping those customers. And as you know, this is a partner-based ecosystem that makes this all possible. So we really get involved with working with the partners to make sure that these workloads and their solutions and how they architect this in Azure are the best, and that these workloads run as well as possible. So we get involved with a lot of tuning and things like that. So basically helping out customers and partners on their cloud transformation journey from legacy to cloud. That's what we do.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, sir. Steve, you were one of the first people that I knew to talk about digital transformation quite a few years back. Could you share your thoughts about, because I think people consider this as digital transformation, is it really an actual possibility for people who are running on the mainframe today?
Yeah, great question. It is, and I love when we get in conversations with customers and they had no idea that they thought that this mainframe was going to be with them for a very, very long time, and that they were going to have to always have some kind of a footprint on-prem, and that they could build these elaborate cloud architectures, cloud native architectures that were in some form or fashion going to have to integrate with the mainframe. And quite frankly, that's before my current role, one of my previous roles at Microsoft, that's what I did, was integrate a lot of the web-based architectures out there with the mainframe. That's a very mature business, but with digital transformation and the possibilities that are out there, it's entirely possible to take all of those workloads on the mainframe and move them to a cloud platform. And I know what we're going to get into in a little bit, but you just start peeling the onion on the benefits of when you start doing that, right? So it's just obviously there's cost reductions that come into play, but just the cloud native and the power and the feature functionality of the cloud just really start to make that a very compelling path for customers.
But to me, that's the really exciting part, the fact that people can really do things differently than they've been doing them for the last 20, 30, or some cases 40 years, being able to leverage cloud native so that they can be more responsive to changing business needs. It makes it, to me, very, very exciting that people now have more options than they've ever had before.
Absolutely, absolutely. A good example that comes to mind when you're mentioning that that I find to be a big compelling driver is DevOps.
Oh
And
yeah.
when I got into this, I really didn't, to me, it was like, oh, you're going to want to do this because it's a lot less expensive. Typically 10x less expensive as far as the month over month cost of running something in Azure as compared to on-prem for a given mainframe. But what we're finding is that DevOps is becoming one of the primary drivers. And you know, I know you and me being an old COBOL Kix developer, we had TSO ISPF, right, which was state of the art back in the 80s. And I still find customers that are still using that. And when you contrast that and talk about what you can do with a DevOps pipeline, it really starts to open their eyes as far as why that's a big compelling reason to actually do this.
Absolutely. We both have been through the scenario where we had those reams of books behind your desk where you had to go through and figure out what to do. The flexibility that DevOps affords people today is just monumental.
Absolutely.
Okay. Talking about modernization, from a mainframe perspective, and I know different people look at it differently, what do you consider application modernization to really mean then? Is it just DevOps, or what are the components that you see people taking advantage of?
Yeah, that another great question, because it is a very overloaded term that means different things to different people. In my world, we there's a there's the well-known 5 or 6 R's slide that somebody made however many years ago, and I won't bore you or your viewers with that because they probably know what it is. I think it really does, what we like to do when we talk about application modernization is we like to understand what that means, what that means to the customer, right? A lot of times what it means is you might have a financial system. This is very, very popular, and I'm sure it probably resonates with a lot of folks watching this, is that you have a financial package once upon a time that was written on a mainframe. And a lot of times the best landing zone for that is SAP or some kind of COTS package, right? And so that's modernization. It's running in Azure. It's really more of a data port, or but that's one. The other is I've been involved with some, especially it's very popular in FinServ to do a rewrite. So let's just take this thing. It was state of the art. It kept the lights on, paid the bills for 25, 30 years. It's time to rewrite it in something like Kafka or one of these modern architectures that are out there. So that's definitely one. The other is I just want to run in the cloud. I want to take what I have, I want to bring it. I don't really want to change that much. I still have some COBOL developers, so I want to, I value that estate. I just want it to be less expensive. And so, on the other side of the spectrum, it's rehost, right? So less risk. I'm pretty much gonna. I always like to say with something like that, people go home on a Friday, they come back on a Monday, and the users don't know that they're actually running in Azure.
Exactly.
Right? It's a magic trick. And then the other one that I'm finding more and more is all right, so I'm losing my COBOL developers, and there's not a plethora, a renewable resource as they used to be back in the 80s and 90s. There's less and less COBOL developers, and there's more and more Java and C# developers. So I was just talking to a customer the other day, and they were like, look, I don't want to go, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to tell my developers that they're still going to be developing in COBOL when they all had to learn it and their native language is Java or C#. So I want to be in a modern language. I want to have DevOps. That's okay to keep the existing code base, but I don't want it to be COBOL. I want I want to convert that COBOL to Java or .NET or something like that. So with answer, a long-winded way of answering your question is I think it's all of that, right? It's a spectrum, and it's like we got to plug in and go, all right, what exactly are you looking to to get out of this modernization journey?
I could not agree more. We talk all the time that there is no one perfect answer for every possible organization that's looking to move from the mainframe, because no two mainframe environments are the same, no two pain points are the same. And just trying to get people to agree what those 5 or 6 R's really mean is challenging enough, but providing that flexibility absolutely is key.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Steve, I know we've had the opportunities over the years to work together in both public and private sector opportunities. Do you feel that there are any unique concerns that maybe state and federal government face that companies outside of the government don't face?
Absolutely, absolutely. The number one, I mean, obviously with last year and 2020 COVID-19 and everything, it created a lot of interest. Let's just put it that way. I at Microsoft focus a lot on state and local because I used to work in that industry before Microsoft actually, and actually covering it when I was in Microsoft or in a sales role. And I can tell you that there were a couple of stories that made the press that we probably all, I mean, your audience could go back and remember. The one that I think that comes to mind for me was in New Jersey, which is kind of like the poster child of these unemployment insurance applications that were out there. That, let's face it, they've been great. They've been running. They've been doing what they're supposed to do, but all of a sudden we had this additional load that they were never really engineered to handle.
Right.
And that's when you started making, obviously, like you either make the paper for good reasons or bad reasons, and this is for bad reasons, right? So the obvious thing there is that's what I would argue that's one of the founding principles of the cloud, right? Was to address those types of workloads that they're running, and then it's like they're supposed to, and then Christmas happens or some kind of event happens, and we need to throw additional capacity and compute at that, and that's not that easy to do with the mainframe. So I find that is one of the biggest drivers where folks actually, it wasn't a problem before, but then when that started happening, customers started reaching out to us and going, what can I do to solve this type of a problem? So that, considered also with budgetary constraints, is these things, what they're paying for these mainframes and on-prem with the facilities and everything like that, it's not cheap, right? And so if you can save money and you have a very compelling story to mitigate the risk and save money, that's another driver I find for state and local government and federal customers. And then the other thing too is they have that almost all of these customers have a foot in both worlds, right? So they have a foot in the cloud world, they have a foot in the on-prem world, but most of their data and their AI and their analytics is in the cloud. So if we can do anything to essentially move those workloads closer to their data lakes and their places where they try to predict the future, or do what information management is all about, then they realize that that's a good thing. So I find those to be the main drivers. That, and of course, like I said before, there's probably there's not an never-ending supply of COBOL programmers, right? So
that has been proven for sure.
Yeah, I think there's less and less each year. It's a great language, and it's been around for a long, long time. But I think object-oriented languages, and modern languages just have some incredible advantages.
Without a doubt. You mentioned the cloud just in general before. I'd like to ask you specifically about Azure. As mainframe customers start to look to the cloud, why Azure? What are some of the advantages that they would find Azure to provide specifically?
Yeah, another good question. And what the first response that I have to that is, before, and was not even really related to mainframe as much as one of the reasons Microsoft has had a really good story when it comes to cloud is because of the great work that's happened with Microsoft in Office and O365,
Right.
right? And there's a lot of customers out there that have already made that journey to O365. And I would say most of them are happy. They realize the benefit. Office is just a very mature, great, solution. But the price of admission to get there is you have to do the grunt work, the foundation work, and that typically involves taking your identity stores, everything that was running your typically your on premises footprint, in the form of Active Directory. Typically,
Mhm.
I mean, Active Directory is probably the biggest one, and you had to move that to Azure, right? To Azure Active Directory. So you had to migrate that identity up there, and when you did, you actually sort of created a conduit, a pipeline, so that now all this identity that it's basically the crown jewels, you could argue, of your IT is now seamlessly integrated with cloud platforms, right? A cloud platform like Azure. I mean, you can integrate with anything with that. I mean, Azure Active Directory has just got such a great integration story. And so, having said that, the mainframe plugs into that, right? So in the mainframe, we have RACF, top secret, things like that. And thanks to the great work done by the partners, that seamlessly integrates with typically something like Azure Active Directory. A lot of times, folks have their own sort of variation of LDAP or what might be out there, but those in and of themselves also integrate with Azure Active Directory. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that one of the most compelling reasons that I found, mainframe or not, just from a cloud migration standpoint or modernization standpoint, is the identity story that Microsoft has had, and it's very strong. And I find that it's kind of the wind in the sails for a lot of these transformation journeys.
It's really a cohesive point for being able to look at moving to the cloud and being able to leverage that. So I can see where that is very, very important.
Yep.
Steve, in terms of technologies, we hear an awful lot now about containerization. I'd like to get your viewpoint on, is containerization a goal that you feel most mainframe companies could and should explore, or are there reasons that they perhaps should not explore that?
Yeah, that's a great question that I have an opinion that's maybe not that popular. Containerization at the end of the day is a deployment model to me, and it offers some inherent benefits, but with the price of some additional complexity. It solves some very key problems, namely scalability and things like that, and just it manages itself. So it's very, and from that standpoint, if you have workloads where you're going to benefit from that, then containerization is a great technology. What I find is that I kind of view this as a journey. Containerization is a sort of a step towards
Mhm.
microservices, right? Where you get into like truly decomposing these monoliths that are out there, and containerization is a good first step. I.e., you can go into a VM, take your monolith and go into a VM. That's kind of that's been done. There's nothing new there. That's been done, as you well know, that's been done for like the last 30 years, probably. It's been very popular. And then containerization is taking that a step further so that now we can actually, reap a little bit more of the cloud benefits. And I would argue that the next step is really going into, true microservices, where you have, you're now in a microservices architecture, and you've taken that monolith, hopefully, the keeping the core business logic intact, but in a truly more cloud native. The more you can go cloud native, I think, towards that journey, then the better your company is going to be with that solution, that workload, because you're going to be more agile and have the ability to respond to things that go bump in the night and cause issues.
Steve, Not surprisingly, I feel you were spot on with that. I kind of worry sometimes that people look at containerization just as a panacea. It's a cure-all, and it is absolutely a great step, but it isn't right, in my opinion, for every application. I think people need to kind of look at what their own environment is like and determine where that benefit comes from. Like you, I think that microservices, looking at doing things differently, is the real key to be able to leverage that. Deciding if I have a batch versus an online application, where can I start to pull those pieces out to make them more viable and available? That's every bit as important as just saying, well, here's containerization, let's go chase it.
Yep, yep. I always thought that technology and just in general is very similar to the fashion industry, and containers are like, turtlenecks are in. Everyone wants to do containers, and a lot of times you'll have a conversation with like, all right, what do you really want to do? And maybe sometimes it's a good fit, just like you were saying, and maybe sometimes there's a better approach. But
it's important to have those conversations. You are right.
Yep.
Steve, I'd like to get your opinion, because I think this is important to organizations. The mainframes, it's a great environment. We both have a long history with it, and it has worked well for an awful long time. As organizations look to move to the cloud, how secure do you feel that they really can be about the security levels they can see moving from the mainframe to the cloud?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And once bore you with the details, but we have some really good collateral and things that we can talk about as far as how Azure data centers are set up, the levels of monitoring within Azure, the security ring fields that we put around Azure to make it secure. Once you start going through that, then you start to realize that you probably could never architect an on-prem data center or a mainframe to be as secure as a cloud platform like Azure, right? Because there are so many levels. Of course, there's nothing stopping anybody from, creating a VM and putting some public endpoints on it, right? I mean, you can definitely, if a loaded gun, you can do a lot of damage if you don't know what you're doing. But and that's where my team comes in. We have expertise around that, so that we get that question a lot. It's like, hey, this is this has never been hacked. This mainframe's never been hacked, and we don't want it to be hacked. And when we're running it in Azure, and so our job is to really come in and talk about the layers of security that we put on top of that, so that you're not going to get hacked. And then you couple that with one of the things that so we can make these workloads as secure or more secure actually in Azure. One of the things that we can do that is really not something that the mainframe is really good at is we can also, our BCDR story, our business continuity and disaster recovery story, is so much better. I'm sure you've seen this. We'll have a conversation about what's your RPO and your RTO, and they'll talk about days. Well, we got to be up, and if we got to go down, we got a 2-day window. I mean, wow. I mean, we can come back and say, we'll have you back up in 30 minutes. I mean, you're not, if you do go down, you're not going to lose any transactions. And when you start coupling that with security, it just becomes, like I said, very, very compelling story.
I have always said, if you treat the maintenance of the cloud with the same intensity that you treat the maintenance of the mainframe, and you really utilize the tools that are available, you absolutely can see at least the same level of security, as you say, if not more. What about, on the other hand, what about scalability and performance? From your experiences, are people seeing equal to or better performance in the cloud? And what about the story about scalability as opposed to what they see on the mainframe?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I probably should mention there's some. I actually helped some customers on some benchmarks. We have something called ZREF, And there's one that's out there that is, very, I think, pretty well known. And I think, my numbers might not be completely spot on, but on one single VM, which I believe was a 32-way machine, they were able to get to something crazy like 28,000 nits, uh,
Wow.
which is, it might have been 64. You have to go back and look. Just look up ZRef benchmark and you'll see it. So and that's on one VM. So that's a huge bank. That's a large global GCIFI, right? Globally financial institution. So the story as far as the capacity of the cloud is, we don't really even talk too much. We still talk about it a little bit, but it was like when I first joined this team, it was like, well, is this thing as fast? Can it be as fast as my mainframe? And when you show them what you can do, then it's pretty, it's a pretty good story, I think. From a scalability, one of the benefits of the cloud is obviously we have the ability to satisfy the daily, routine running of an application, a workload. And then when something like, again, like something like COVID hits, or we have like extreme cases where unemployment insurance, or, this system that was only used to, a certain amount of usage, all of a sudden it's at 3x, right?
Right.
And in Azure, it's just so easy to say, I need 3x compute, boom, and there you go. And then the flip side of that benefit is probably the most compelling, which is, and when I'm done with my high watermark, I go back down to where I was.
That is
I
key, without a doubt.
and I didn't have to, no servers had to die in the process. I didn't have to throw up a bunch of hardware to do that, or, get a bunch of different CPUs from IBM to make that happen. I just added the capacity, got through, and then I took capacity away. And I think most people, a lot of folks get that scalability, that elasticity of the cloud is huge, a huge benefit.
Without a doubt. Um, Something that I've always thought is important is data. Um, from your experiences, what can organizations expect in terms of what they can do with their data once it's off of the mainframe?
What can they do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I mean, the you know the story as far as what you can do with your data. I always say, like, what you want to do with your data is you want to. I was at a hospital once, and I remember one of the things, and this is on an IBM mainframe, and we could tell you what the census was in the hospital, and we could probably tell you what the census was going to be, over the next day or so. And they had to plan nursing, resources, and everything that goes into that, right? When you have patients, but what they wanted to know was what it was going to be like next week, right? Sort of predicting the future. And how can you do that? Well, we couldn't back then. This is the early 90s. Everything that we did, we would, back then we would download it into something like Excel or something like that, and we'd do some kind of regression, and we go, it's probably going to be something like this, but who knows? Well, that scenario is now actually, we can actually give you a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like. So I always say we want to get closer to predicting, what's it going to be like. I can maybe tell you what it's going to be like tomorrow, the next day. What's it going to be like 7 days from now? It's kind of like the weather, right? And now we're really good with that, and the reason is because of the data. And so when we can take that data and put it into, an analytics platform like Azure, we can do crazy stuff with it, and that's one of the things that we can do. And the other one is, I've seen it, and one that sort of is familiar to me is fraud management, right?
Mhm.
Where we want to, we have all this data, and we want to be able to, look at this and go, how much of this is real, and how do I know if there's not some fraudulent activities going on? And when we have the ability to analyze the data in real time, like we can in the cloud, we can start to analyze those and find those. And that's just, amazing to be able to do that, because we obviously cut down on wastes, which is really, really important, especially in government.
just being able to look at data as a different tool. That's the exciting part to me. Getting compute off is great, and oftentimes that's monetary. You see the benefits, but the benefits of working with your data in different ways, that's the real differentiator I've always felt.
Completely agree.
Steve, I think, there is no magic button that you push where these things just automatically happen, obviously. I'd like to ask your opinion, because I think this is important to everyone as they consider their alternatives. From an architectural viewpoint, what are the biggest challenges that you feel people should be aware of as they contemplate a migration from the mainframe?
Yeah, and that's what my team actually really focuses on. A good example, things that I've been involved with is mainframes are really, really good at processing transactions really fast. They, this day, I mean, some of the transaction throughput for these reservation systems or these medical systems, where they have to process, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe, millions of records. They're really good at that. And in mainframes typically, composed of two types of workloads, online and batch, right?
Right.
And so one of the things where we really sort of had to, throw down and get into the weeds and figure out how are we gonna match this, right? How are we gonna match this really impressive transaction processing speed? And so I would say the biggest architectural challenge that we've really have worked with and have solved, I should say. We've there was one where we started out, I think we were 10x slower than a mainframe batch window.
Mm-hmm.
And then we actually just from working on it, the team here that at Microsoft, we had to enlist the data ninja team, which is great. They got it to faster than the mainframe, right? But it was tuning, and we couldn't change any of the code. It really came down to how do we make sure that the database performs as well as possible, and how do we mitigate latency, right? So when we have processes talking to another process in the cloud, one of the benefits is it's really easy to spin those things up, but we got to make sure that when we do spin them up, that they're as close as possible and that the latency is next to nothing. So that I find to be latency, transaction speed, and things like that. If you just come in what we are doing, our team is we are documenting best practices as we do this with reference architectures. Like, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that you enlist these types of features and functionality that are native to Azure to make sure your workloads are performing as well as possible. So we do that with customers, and then obviously with partners and partner solutions that are out there, we work with them on tuning. Hey, let's make sure that this thing is going to run faster than a mainframe. Let's always go for that. But I do find that if you don't know which cloud services to leverage to decrease that latency and that data throughput, then you could end up with a non-performant type of workload.
And it's important for people to understand that it can be done. It just takes the work, right?
Yep, it does. It takes wisdom and know-how and been there, done that.
The battle scars.
Yeah, you have to know what to look for. That's true.
That's right. Well, Steve, it looks like we have unfortunately come to the end of our time for today's session. First, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. It's been a delight. And I'd just like to throw this out. If people wanted to learn more about what you and your team do, how should they best reach out to you?
Thank you for that question. And based on your guidance, if you look at my picture there, you can see the email address, legacy-to-azure@microsoft.com. That is the alias for my team. Everyone on my team will basically get that email and let us know, what your question is, and let us know how we can help.
Fantastic. Again, Steve, thank you so very much.
Walter, thank you.
It's a pleasure, sir. And for the members of the audience, thank you once again for taking the time out of your busy days to join us for the Walter's World podcast. If you want to keep up with upcoming ones that we have, and we have some exciting ones in the future, please just go to www.astadia.com and check out our podcast series. Thank you all so much and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.